By the early 1800s, the Maasai were not only a unified tribe, but they were also a formidable force whose relentless wrath could be felt by any tribe they came across. In fact, the Arab slave trade in present-day Kenya was largely reduced by the presence of Maasai warriors. They resisted occupation by any Arabs in their territory and even forced slave catchers' caravans to find alternative routes to Uganda by making it extremely dangerous for any of them to pass through the extensive Maasai territory. Better yet, by the time Europeans were beginning to explore the interiors of Kenya, Arab traders would even warn them to be mindful of a ferocious tribe in interior Kenya that would kill any strange foreigners on sight. For those of you who think this is just a bunch of BS, I have linked several sources below that show how Maasai warriors prevented Arab influence in interior Kenya. Anyway, the success of the Maasai tribe back in those days can be largely attributed to 𝗣𝗚𝗣𝗍, who were spiritual leaders, chief medicine men, and diviners for the Maasai people. These individuals were also prophets and were born with the ability to foresee, foretell, and discover hidden knowledge, usually by the aid of their psychic powers. With that in mind, before Maasai warriors left for war with a neighboring tribe, they first had to consult their 𝗣𝗚𝗣𝗍 to make sure that the odds were in their favor. And whenever the prophet saw in a premonition or vision that the raid would only end in calamity for his warriors, he usually had two choices: either command the warriors to halt and postpone their planned raid, or go before Enkai, which is the Maasai term for God, and offer sacrifice to see if he could switch the odds to their favor. That said, there were a few instances where warriors would disrespect their religious leaders, and to see a great example of what will usually happen if they did that, check out the video I recently created on the Battle of Mogori. I'll leave its link in the description below. Another area 𝗣𝗣𝗍𝗣𝗍's ability to see the future came in handy was when neighboring tribes, who included the Kamba and the Gikuyu, were planning on raiding a Maasai community. The 𝗣𝗍𝗍𝗣 would usually receive a warning in the form of a vision, which gave the community's warriors known as Morans sufficient time to organize and prepare for the imminent attack. In a nutshell, whenever the Maasai tribe ran into a problem they didn't understand or couldn't solve, they would go to a 𝗣𝗍𝗍𝗣, who would get in touch with his psychic powers and find the solution, if any exists. Now that you have a good understanding of the role of these Maasai prophets, let's look at their origin and how greed and disagreements between two potential 𝗣𝗍𝗍𝗣s led to the collapse of this once mighty tribe. The origin of Maasai prophets. The legend of the first 𝗣𝗍𝗍𝗣 begins with two Maasai warriors who had gone on a days-long hunting trip in present-day Ngong back in the 15th century. One day, while the two were walking through the dense mountain ranges, they came across a young boy who was sitting at the topmost area of the highlands. Their initial thought was that the child must have accidentally wandered away from his nearby village, but after extensively searching the surroundings and not finding a sign of any community, they realized they had a choice to make. They could either leave the boy to fend for himself in the wilderness, or carry him and bring him up as their own if they failed to find his parents. Well, the first warrior thought that they should leave the boy for the simple fact that the journey they were going on was a dangerous one, and the boy wasn't prepared to defend himself or run in the face of danger. The second warrior, however, pointed out that even though the other warrior's reason seemed like a valid one, leaving this young boy in the forest was still essentially handing him a death sentence, so they could as well take him along and see what happens. Well, they took the second warrior's advice, and after the young boy survived the long journey and they got back to the village, the second warrior decided to raise him up as his own, and he named the boy 𝗣𝗣𝗍𝗣𝗣𝗍. As the years went by, it became obvious that 𝗣𝗣𝗍𝗣𝗍 possessed a special gift. His father's cattle that he usually tended to were always healthy and fat, even during times of drought and when every other villager's cattle were dying and starving. The Maasai also observed 𝗣𝗣𝗍𝗣𝗍 disclosing information that was only held by a council of elders whose members had been sworn to secrecy, and sometimes would even direct people to where they could find their lost property, such as cattle and weapons. So, acknowledging his unusual power, the Maasai Council of Elders took him in and made him the tribe's spiritual leader, known as 𝗣𝗍𝗣𝗣𝗍. And ever since, descendants of 𝗣𝗣𝗍𝗍𝗣 would inherit his gift and serve to protect the Maasai community. Note though, While the power of a 𝗣𝗣𝗡 is hereditary, a sitting 𝗣𝗣𝗡 only picks one person to train as the next generation's 𝗣𝗣𝗡. And during the training period, the wannabe 𝗣𝗣𝗡 will be exposed to all the mystical secrets of 𝗣𝗣𝗡s that have been collected over the centuries. The true 𝗣𝗣𝗡s who failed their tribe. With the origin of the Maasai 𝗣𝗣𝗡 in mind, let's look at the true wannabe 𝗣𝗣𝗡s who led to the downfall of the Maasai. And by the way, I share images on Instagram and Twitter about different interesting tricks our communities used to survive in the past, so make sure you check me out there as well. I'll leave the links to my social profiles in the description below. Now back to the wannabe 𝗣𝗣𝗡s. Ironically, the true wannabe 𝗣𝗣𝗡s are also said to have come from a great lineage of 𝗣𝗣𝗡s that produced the highest number of these prophets for more than 100 years. And this was the lineage of the great 𝗣𝗣𝗡 Supeet, who ruled from 1850 to 1866. Like all other 𝗣𝗣𝗡s, Supeet inherited his gift from his father, but not much has been documented about Supeet, besides his father's and grandfather's names, which were 𝗣𝗑𝗡𝗘𝗃 and 𝗑𝗑𝗡𝗃𝗃 respectively. Anyway, when Supeet sensed that his time to move on to the spiritual world had come, he passed on the mantle of leadership to his son Mbatian Supeet in 1866. Mbatian went on to be known as the greatest medicine man to ever exist in Maasai land. In fact, the highest peak of Mount Kenya has been named after him. And as you will see by the end of the video, all three highest peaks of the mountain have been named after different Maasai 𝗣𝗣𝗡s of the 19th century. Anyway, during Mbatian's rule that lasted from 1866 to 1890, the Maasai nation enjoyed a period of prosperity, tranquility, and seemingly mysterious unity among the different Maasai sub-communities. It was also during his reign that the first European explorers described the Maasai as the lords of East Africa, for the simple fact they arguably had the highest population and covered more than 80,000 square miles, all the way from Mount Meru near present-day Arusha in Tanzania to present-day central Kenya. Mbatian had managed to unite the Ilkisongo Maasai community in Tanzania with the Ilpurko community living in Narok County and partly in Kajiado County. Unfortunately, it was also during Mbatian's era that he prophesied the suffering Maasai people were about to endure thanks to strangers whose skin would resemble that of flamingos, and even foretold about an iron snake that would split the Maasai territory into two. Both prophecies came to pass a few years after his death when the Europeans started constructing the Kenya-Uganda Railway. Now, Mbatian had more than 100 wives and too many children to count, but the most important to history among his children were his two sons, Senteu and Lenana. Senteu was Mbatian's eldest son, which automatically made him his father's favorite, as he was supposed to inherit his leadership mantle after his passing. This also meant that while dealing with his clients, Mbatian would only teach Senteu how to carry out the duties of a 𝗣𝗣𝗡, and all his other sons, including Lenana, would usually watch from the sidelines. Little did they know, however, that Lenana was way sharper than his brother. He went on to perfect the skills of a 𝗣𝗣𝗡 just from watching his father work whenever an opportunity presented itself. Better yet, by the time he was getting initiated into the 𝗣𝗟 age group by a circumcision rite, he was so good that he had garnered his own following of clients. Anyway, when Mbatian sensed that his time to pass on had come around 1890, he announced to all Maasai communities that whichever son he would call to his deathbed would inherit his position as the 𝗣𝗣𝗡. Of course it was going to be Senteu. So, a few months later, he called his first wife and asked her to send his eldest son Senteu to his hut first thing in the morning. Mbatian's plan was to give Senteu his final blessing and the ritual power required to lead the Maasai people. Unbeknown to them, however, Lenana's mother was in the calf shed tending to the cattle and overheard the entire conversation. So when she got back to her own hut, she called her son Lenana, and the two of them started devising a plan that would allow him to steal the inheritance meant for his brother. At the time, Lenana knew that his father was too old, partially blind and bedridden, which meant that fooling him wouldn't be an impossible task. So, early the next morning before anyone else was awake, Lenana was woken up by his mother and sent to his old father's hut. "Father, I have come," Lenana said while entering his father's hut, and since Mbatian thought that no one else knew that he was going to meet Senteu that morning, he immediately mistook Lenana for his preferred Senteu and requested him to take a seat. He started by telling him how he would like him to guide the tribe as well as the dangers that were awaiting the Maasai community in the near future. He then asked Lenana, still thinking it was Senteu, to hand him several herbs that he would use to carry out the power transfer ritual. And after praying to God and the land's ancestors, he gave the concoction he had created to Lenana to drink, which signified that Lenana had officially received the secrets of the 𝗖𝗛𝗣𝗣𝗢 craft. Then when all was said and done, Lenana left his father to rest and went back to his hut. A few hours later, Senteu walked in asking to speak with his father, and Mbatian was left in dismay and shock. He instantly realized his mistake, but at the same time understood that carrying out the ritual a second time and on a different individual would only anger God. Worse yet, given what Lenana had pulled off, he also understood that the tribe's union wasn't going to last if the two brothers existed in the same territory, let alone Senteu letting his brother rule over him. So, with that in mind, Mbatian blazed Senteu, and after a short persuasion asking him to maintain the peace, he directed him to go and lead the 𝗖𝗛𝗣𝗣𝗢𝗥 section of the Maasai community, and that was his plan to separate the two sons and avoid internal wrangles. Well, his plan failed, because shortly after his death at the end of 1890, a civil war broke out between supporters of Lenana and supporters of Senteu, and by its end in the early 20th century, the civil war had reduced the population of the Maasai community by more than 80%. It's also essential to touch on what led to the beginning of the civil war. According to legend, shortly after the death of Mbatian, Senteu had a vision that Lenana's warriors were slaughtering some of his own. Apparently, Lenana felt like since he was the Blessed One, whether rightfully or not, that he was the one who should be ruling the entirety of the Maasai community and territory, which in turn meant that he saw his brother as a threat to his authority. And with his father now out of the way, he felt like he had the perfect opportunity to eliminate him once and for good. Anyway, after Senteu disclosed what he had seen in his vision to the warriors that were with him at the camp, none of them took him too seriously. They didn't think that Lenana would risk angering God by attacking his brother after he had been blessed by their father. Still, Senteu had faith in the vision he had seen, so that day he woke up his wife in the middle of the night and disappeared into the darkness. And as he had predicted, Lenana's battalion invaded the camp in the wee hours of the morning and wiped out every male warrior that stood in their way. This was the transgression that resulted in the decades-long civil war. To make matters worse, immediately after the civil war broke out, the Maasai were struck by catastrophic pandemics like rinderpest and smallpox. These pandemics claimed 95% of all Maasai cattle and led to loss of lives in the tens of thousands. And as if that wasn't enough bad luck for the Maasai community, in the early 1900s, Lenana entered into a treaty with the British colonial settlers believing that they would help him ward off his brother who was growing more powerful by the day. Lenana thought that this would help him consolidate power as the undisputed 𝗖𝗛𝗣𝗣𝗢𝗣, but as you may have guessed, that wasn't how things really played out. These British settlers presented a series of bogus agreements to Lenana, agreements that saw the Maasai concede most of their lands to white settlers. And due to these blunders, Lenana's influence as the Maasai paramount chief drastically reduced until his usefulness to the British came to an end, at which point they allegedly presented him a poison blanket that worsened his health and finally killed him in his sleep in 1911. It isn't really clear why he didn't foresee that, even though he was a 𝗖𝗛𝗣𝗣𝗢𝗣 himself. On the Tanzanian territory, Senteu was also significantly weakened from the skirmishes with his brother, the British that were helping his brother, and the German colonial settlers that had colonized Tanzania. His death, however, remains unknown. What's more, by the death of Lenana, the Maasai population had dwindled all the way to less than 20,000 people thanks to the combination of civil wars and calamities that had overtaken the community. In fact, during this period, British colonial settlers even started predicting that the Maasai would become extinct by 1950. This was never the case, however, as rapid population growth strategies were established by the tribe's council of elders, and the men were advised to marry as many wives as they could and give birth to as many children as they could. By the end of 1919, the Maasai population had doubled and rebounded to approximately 42,000 and continued to rise. That's it for today. If you like the content, kindly do not forget to smash the like button below. This will help the channel grow and allow me to make more videos in the future. Also, if you have a topic you think I should cover, do not hesitate to leave a comment below. Thank you and see you again next week.